Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Although the campaigning is yet to officially start, the race to succeed Michael Bloomberg is already underway, with a number of contenders pulling in campaign cash and planning for a competitive race in 2013. While my next guest is used to covering politicians, this time he says he's ready to throw his hat in the ring as a candidate himself. Joining us now is the publisher of Manhattan Media and a recently declared candidate for mayor, Tom Allon. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Errol.
And congratulations or condolences. You're in for quite a ride.
I'm looking forward to it. It's been a lot of fun. The first week has been a lot of fun.
Well, let me try and insert you into what I have as a theory of how mayors go in this town. We're about the same age, so I'm sure you're going to remember all of this.
Sure.
And my theory is that when administrations turn over from one mayor to another, it's usually in an atmosphere of crisis. So a beam comes in and there's a growing fiscal crisis. And in 1977, Ed Koch comes in, and it's because we have a real fiscal crisis going on. The next change of administration is when Dinkins comes in part because there's kind of a corruption scandal and real racial tension.
Racial tension, yep, absolutely. I covered that race.
And then, of course, Giuliani comes in, and we've got a crime crisis. Yep. And then Mayor Bloomberg, right after 9/11, an obvious huge crisis.
Absolutely.
So here we are,
What's
2013. What's the crisis?
Well, there's two crises, I mean, among others, but the two significant crises are jobs and education reform. Jobs are obviously a huge crisis nationally. Education reform is starting to sweep the country, and the mayor has started a very intelligent process of reforming education, and we need somebody to come in to continue and complete the task, or at least continue it along for the next 8 years. You know, first on jobs, you know, when you walk around certain neighborhoods in the city, and really all neighborhoods, there are people who are just looking for work, who need work. You know, I know it personally because of my friends who are out of work, whether they're on Wall Street or whether they're in other industries. My wife, who's a very smart woman, who was a reporter for the New York Times, we have 3 children at home. She would love to work part-time. And I think one of the things that we haven't done, I think one of the paradigms I think needs to shift in this country, is allowing for more part-time employees. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be campaigning on. I'm reading a book now which is fascinating called The Fourth Third Solution. It was actually recommended to me by Dan Cantor, the head of the Working Families Party. And it talks about how the way to solve the child care crisis in this country is for parents to each work 2/3 of the time, and for them to both devote 1/3 of their time to child rearing, which is obviously a great egalitarian idea. I don't know if this country's ready for something like that, as bold and revolutionary as that, but that's, I think, a direction we need to start moving in. Now that jobs are scarce, and they're becoming even more scarce in a global economy, that might be one interesting way of attacking jobs. You know, there are many people in the city right now who are working 70 hours a week, and there are those that are working 0 hours a week.
Sure.
Why can't we balance that out a little bit better?
Well, as mayor, what would you do to make that happen?
Well, I might even talk, you know, it might be a way to slim down government. You know, again, I don't know if you have children, but I have 3 kids that are teenagers. When they were young, and even now, I would prefer to work 2/3 of the time or 3/4 of the time. Obviously, if I'm mayor, I've got to work 5/4 of the time. But I think we should allow people who work in city government who have children the voluntary option of maybe working 2/3 or 3/4 of the time. It would be a way, again, to trim government, which I think is something that's absolutely necessary. A $66 billion budget, which has gone up 88% under this administration and with this council, I think is sort of unacceptable. So I think that's, you know, even though I'm a Democrat and I believe in all sort of the progressive things that a Democrat believes in, I do believe in slimming down government. I believe in making it a more efficient government. And if you can make it a win-win where parents get to spend more time with their children and really raise their children in the ways they need to do, that's a win-win, and also having effective government.
Where's the biggest piece of fat in government that you think we could trim?
You know, I think certainly in the education department, and I've spent a lot of time at Tweed, and even though I think there's some great people working there and some people that have done some great work, I would do things differently. I don't think it's an efficient education department. So I don't know if I'd call it fat, but I think there's streamlining. I think there are agencies that can be combined. You know, one of the things I plan to do over the next 2 years, and I've started doing it in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks since I made this decision, is meeting with people who I respect and I think are intelligent in New York. I had lunch yesterday with Dick Ravitch. I hope he doesn't mind that I'm saying this. I had lunch with Ed Koch 2 weeks ago. Carl Weisbrod is somebody who is the former Economic Development Council chairman. These are the elders of New York, the smartest people in the city. You know, Rudy Giuliani was a successful mayor in his first term. I didn't agree with everything he said, but one thing he did in the run-up from '89 to '93 when I covered the race was he went to what was called mayor school. Guys like Richard Schwartz and Jennifer Rabb and really smart people who were around him, they brought in the smartest people in the city to school him on city government. I know education really well, and I believe that I know it in a nuanced way that nobody else does who's talking about running for this race. But there are many areas I know that I need to bone up on.
Explain that, by the way. A lot of our viewers don't know. You started 2 high schools.
I've started 2 high schools in the city. I was, I'm not going to take full credit for either of them, but I was
charter schools. I see.
They were actually public schools. 10 years ago, in 2000, I was involved with a committee that started a new high school on the Upper East Side. It eventually became NY1's High School. That was a fascinating experience. And by the way, on that committee was Eva Moskowitz, who was very instrumental in that, and I worked side by side with her. Carolyn Maloney, the congresswoman on the East Side, really, I think, chaired that committee. Roy Goodman, who was the Republican state senator, was on that committee. Virginia Fields, the Manhattan Bar president. It was one of those great victories where, they say, victory is 1,000 fathers or mothers and defeat is an orphan. There were a lot of great people who worked on that. And it was a really educational experience for me, and it also, I think, galvanized me to want to get involved in public service. After that, that really successful experience on the East Side, since I'm an Upper West Sider and I grew up on the Upper West Side and I had 2 children at the time who were 6 and 4, I thought, wow, I got to do this on the West Side with the elected leaders here, so that in 5 or 6 years or 7 years when my kids are looking at high schools, that I have the same opportunity these great these East Siders will have. And by the way, Eleanor Roosevelt is one of the most popular schools in the city right now. I think it had more applications last year than any other school in the city. So I met with a number of West Side leaders, Gail Brewer at the time, Scott Stringer, who then was an assemblyman, Eric Schneiderman, who was a state senator, Jerry Nadler, the congressman. We had about 3 or 4 meetings, and I believe it was in Schneiderman's office. And they all were well-meaning and really tried, but it didn't go anywhere for a variety of reasons. And we were busy with our various jobs. So fast forward 7 years, in 2008, after 2009, I believe it was, Gail Brewer calls me up one day and she said, "Tom, you're finally going to get your wish." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, Brandeis is closing down. DOE is just closing it down, and they're going to put 4 schools in that building, and I want you to work on one of those schools with me." So I was very honored and really was excited about it because this was a dream of mine. The next day I had an idea, which I called Gail about very excitedly. I said, there's so many there are so many math and science high schools in New York. Why don't we start a school that is focused on writing and literature? And let's try to call it the Frank McCourt High School. Frank McCourt was a dear friend of mine. He was a mentor of mine. We taught high school together at Stuyvesant about 25 years ago. Frank McCourt represented, many people know him because he won a Pulitzer Prize for Angela's Ashes. It became one of the most famous writers on the planet, if you will. But Frank McCourt was a teacher in the truest sense of the word. There was joy in his classroom. He and I combined our classes once a week, and I got the chance to watch him in action. He was fantastic. When he died 2 years ago, if you went on the New York Times website that night, there were people blogging, former students of his, talking about what an impact he had on their lives.
We have certainly been following the adventures of trying to find a place for that school, and so I know. And
we found one, and I worked very hard that summer after Frank passed away to get approval for that school. It opened a year and a half ago, and it's a very successful school on the Upper West Side. It's a school for writing and literature. There are many parents who have come to me, asking for help to get their kids in there. I don't have that kind of power, but I've recommended they speak to the principal there, who's a wonderful principal, Danielle Salzberg, and that school is now a great opportunity for parents.
So we've learned something about your work outside of your newspapers. In our last minute, let me ask you. You do publish a number of newspapers.
I do.
They're on every street corner in lots of different places. What is the standard that you're going to use? Are you going to have an editorial on the front page every day so people get to know you as you run for office?
I am.
How will this interact with the campaign finance board?
I'm putting up a very strong firewall between myself and the editorial products that we put out. In fact, in the first week since I've announced, one of my newspapers has probably been more critical of me than any other media out there, City Hall News, which is our newspapers. If you look at the City and State First Read, which comes out every morning, it's in 11,000 people's Blackberries every morning, and it's really become a fantastic thing. Adam Lisberg, who's our editor, who comes from the Daily News, where you write a column, he really kicked my butt twice last week. I said to a reporter who called me, I said, I founded this publication 5 years ago, and now it's biting me in the ass, if you pardon my expression. So it's one of those things where I think if anybody questions the editorial autonomy that my publications have, look back at City and State First Read last week. There were 2 articles about me that were pretty uncomplimentary.
Okay, let me. This is not going to be our last time to talk, but let me give you a chance just to summarize and ask you this question.
Sure.
We're going to have 12 years of a middle-aged Jewish guy from Manhattan who was in the publishing business as our mayor. Do we need another one?
I'm a very different type of publisher than Mayor Bloomberg. I think he's been a very effective mayor. I think his first 8 years have been a little bit more effective than his last 2 years have been. I know in the next 2 years he's going to do everything in his power to be effective. I come from a different perspective. I grew up in New York. I grew up on the Upper West Side. I'm a first-generation immigrant. My parents were Holocaust survivors. I went to yeshiva as a kid, then private school, then public school, and then Cornell and Columbia here in New York. I've been a New Yorker for the 49 years of my life. I've raised 3 teenagers in New York, all of whom have gone to public schools. I know this city as well as anybody else. I ran a company that had newspapers in every neighborhood in Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Manhattan. I know education. I know what it's like to make payroll for the last 20 years. I employ 120 people. I'm a very different type of person than Mike Bloomberg. I respect him and admire him completely, but to lump me into the same bucket with him, I think is unfair to him and perhaps disingenuous. I will be somebody who I think can continue his legacy, and I think I can build on some of the things that he's done.
Okay, very good. We'll be hearing more from you. Thanks so much for spending some time with us, and good luck. And as they say in boxing, protect yourself at all times.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
It's time for a break. Coming up in just a minute, Curtis Sliwa and Herson Barrero will have lots to say about Rupert Murdoch's long day in front of Parliament. That's next in the Political Rundown. Stay with us.